Hello, ThrillerFest. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to all the attendees, writers, and organizers of ThrillerFest. And thank you especially to this amazing panel of authors joining us today. My name is Kat Johnson, and I'm an editorial director at Audible. We're talking today about how to write thrillers effectively for audio, which is an ever-growing, ever-evolving medium that resonates especially well with mystery and thriller audiences. But if you really want your thriller to break out in this medium, there are some key strategies and tricks you'll want to master if you want to capture the valuable ears of listeners, because it's not quite the same as writing for print. Today, we're going to dig into that and hopefully come up with some real gems of wisdom for folks watching, because there's really no one better to speak from experience on this topic than the four incredible panelists who are with us today: Brian Freeman, Mark Graney, Rachel Howzell Hall, and Margot Hunt. So thank you all so much for being here today. Really excited to chat with you all. I'm going to start by quickly introducing you, and then we'll give you guys the floor to weigh in. First, Mark Graney is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Relentless, the latest installment of the Gray Man series, which follows ex-CIA assassin Court Gentry in a series of fast-paced and meticulously researched international adventures. The film version of the first Gray Man novel will debut on Netflix in 2022, starring Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans. Mark has also Mark has written or co-written 7 Tom Clancy novels and is the co-author of the 2019 military thriller Red Metal and the upcoming Audible original audio drama Armored, which has already been optioned for a film by Sony Pictures. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for being here. Next, I'd like to introduce one of the most exciting and versatile voices in crime fiction, Rachel Howzell Hall. Rachel is the critically acclaimed author of the Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist, And Now She's Gone. She's the co-author of the New York Times bestselling novel, The Good Sister with James Patterson, and an Anthony International Thriller Writers and Left Award nominee for her novels, They All Fall Down, Land of Shadows, Skies of Ash, Trail of Echoes, and City of Saviors in the Detective Eloise Norton series. Her latest project is the best-selling Audible original novella, How It Ends, about a newly divorced woman who suffers a mysterious attack shortly after moving into her new home. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. Next up, Brian Freeman is a New York Times bestselling author of psychological thrillers, including the acclaimed Jonathan Stride and Frost Easton series. His latest novel, Infinite, is a jaw-dropping techno thriller involving trauma, parallel universes, doppelgangers, and hypnotherapy. He's also written an Audible original thriller, The Deep, Deep Snow, which is the first in the Shelby Lake series. Widely acclaimed for his atmospheric settings, complex characters, and twisty plots, Brian was also selected as the official author to continue Robert Ludlum's Jason Bourne series, and his novel, The Bourne Evolution, was named one of Kirkus's best mysteries and thrillers of 2020. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And last but not least, Margot Hunt. Margot is a USA Today and Amazon bestselling author. She's written not one, but 2 very popular Audible originals, the thriller novellas Buried Deep, which released in December 2019, and The House on the Water, released in December 2020. Her debut psychological thriller, Best Friends Forever, examines the complexity of female friendships against a backdrop of duplicity. And her second novel, For Better and Worse, was called the Best Thriller of the Year by Book of the Month. The Last Affair, Margot's latest novel, explores an extramarital affair that ends with the murder of one of the cheated upon spouses. Welcome, Margot.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, all of you guys. I'm so excited. We're going to dig into this topic. I'm going to start with a question for Mark. Like everybody here, you're so prolific, and your work is really beloved in print and in audio. I'd love to know how you got into writing espionage thrillers, because I don't think you have a spy background, and also just when you started to get really excited about the potential of audio for your work.
Yeah, I was a big nonfiction reader growing up. I never really read much fiction, but the first thriller I ever bought in my entire life was Patriot Games by Tom Clancy. And I was studying international terrorism at the time, and I was just kind of fascinated that you could have a really great time and learn something at the same time. So I just started reaching out into that field and that genre and reading everything I could get my hands on. And a few years later, I had an idea for a story, and it took me 15 years to write it. It was a sort of a spy story. It took me 15 years to finish it, and I immediately shelved it, wrote something else, and I think it was my fourth book was The Gray Man, which was the first book that I had published. And I basically just fell into the espionage world because that's what I was interested in reading, and I still consider myself a reader first and a writer second. Although the years are the years of me being a writer are adding up quickly.
Yeah.
But with audio, it was. I didn't have a contract for audio with my first book. My first book was just a small paperback release, and the second book was out. And then Audible came to my agent and made a kind of a small offer and said, would you be interested? We don't know how it's going to do, but would you be interested? So I, of course we took it. And first I was like, what do I have to do? And they're like, nothing. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll take it. And then it just started doing really, really well in audio. And then I started collaborating with Tom Clancy. So that obviously increased my, profile a little bit more, or a lot more. And I started working on those. So that's how I got into, the audiobook side of it as well.
It's such a dream. So you started writing because of Tom Clancy, and then you ended up getting to collaborate with, that's incredible.
Yeah,
Amazing.
it's an amazing thing. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Rachel, my next question is for you. Your work draws on genre conventions that we see a lot in procedurals and in domestic suspense, but you raise these really deep issues of things like domestic violence and racial justice and racism. And you really tell these authentic Black stories in a genre that's still sadly very underrepresented. I'd love to know for you, what drew you to crime fiction specifically, and how important were those traditional genre conventions for you?
Right. First, thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. It was genre fiction, and I actually have one of my Tom Clancy Patriot Games and a few others down here from when I was, in junior high school, reading those stories. And I loved genre fiction. Stephen King, Jackie Collins, anything that, there's a body and there's some, breathlessness. I loved reading it. And I grew up in a kind of rough part of Los Angeles. And so I was very familiar with, the sound of gunfire and helicopters banging and the people screaming at each other in the apartment below us. So, and I was a child of the church. So I was always constantly trying to figure out why people did the things they did to each other and what were the repercussions of those things, whether it was sin and going to hell or if it was sin and going to jail. It was fascinating to me. It terrified me. And I was a bookish child. And so I read to escape, and I read to understand what was going on around me and to find answers. And since I was a bookworm anyway, and I love the feel of paper and pen in my hands, writing just became this thing I did. And I kept a journal starting in, I think it was 4th or 5th grade, all up until maybe 2 years after college. And I would, write about what was going on in my family, what was making me mad, especially in the teenage years where everything was intrigue and upset and wish-washy friends and boys and all the rest of it. So life was a mystery, and I was writing about it. And with my novels, I want to reflect that. I want to reflect those fears that I had growing up and those fears I still have today as a woman in Los Angeles, as a mother of a 17-year-old daughter, as a Black woman, as all of it. And I want to see that in a novel. And I want it told from the point of view of, a Black woman in this genre that's so wide and so timely. And mystery and crime, you can write anything in this. It's so welcoming and it's so broad that you can tell stories that both educate and entertain. And that's what I'm interested in doing. And, all of us, we will have things to write about forever because people will never stop hurting each other. There will never be, silence in the skies at night if, there will be police sirens and ambulance sirens and fires. So yeah, I came to this very, naturally because of who I was, what I read, and what I'm scared of.
That's such a great point. I'm a big true crime person, and that's a great way of we're just trying to figure out why people do these terrible things to each other and the mystery of it all. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Brian, my next question is for you. And I'm just thinking like, gosh, Rachel working with James Patterson and Mark with Tom Clancy, and then you've worked with Robert Ludlum. It's incredible the amount of star wattage we have today. But how did you, Brian, get into writing thrillers yourself? And then getting a little more into the audio side, do you listen to your own audiobooks?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, thrillers and I go back a very, very long way. I can remember my grandmother telling me when I was a kid, "Oh, I'm reading this great new book. It's got lots of bodies in it." So I think it was sort of inevitable that this was the genre I was going to end up in. And in fact, I wrote my first thriller when I was all of 13 years old. I still have it sitting in my nightstand drawer. It was about the kidnapping of the president, full of sex and violence, perfect for a 13-year-old boy.
Of course.
Very, very little has changed. So that was that was 1977. And I think that was also the year that I read my first Robert Ludlum novel, which was the Chancellor manuscript. So that was a big year in terms of shaping me in terms of thrillers. But I ended up writing, I think, 5 books that are still in my nightstand drawer. And boy, there were a lot of days where I was wondering, why was I banging my head against the door of this crazy business? And then about 20 years ago, I wrote a novel called Immoral, and that was the first in my Jonathan Stride series, and we ended up selling Immoral in 17 languages. So it was an amazing way to sort of begin this ride after a lot of days and a lot of books in that nightstand drawer. And with regard to audiobooks, I mean, I've seen so much change in audio editions over the years. I mean, back when I started, people were still sort of fiddling with CDs and cassette tapes on audiobooks, and everything changed so much when there was a better distribution mechanism. But I always hesitate to admit it in public, because I don't want Joe Barrett and my other narrators feeling bad, but I've always struggled to listen to my own audiobooks. I hear my prose in my head in a certain way, and so listening to somebody else do it kind of drives me crazy. I would try on different books and I would just end up giving up. And then finally, with my Audible original, The Deep Snow, I said, I'm just going to have to really listen and see how this all shakes out. And I listened to January LaVoy doing this unbelievable, emotional, amazing narration of The Deep Snow. And by the time I got to the end, I mean, I just had tears running down my face. It was such an emotional and creative experience for me, and so I suddenly realized, yeah, it's okay. I can listen to my own books with somebody else reading them.
That's fabulous. I mean, well, I'm grateful that you kept banging your head against the wall, and I'm also grateful that you found January LaVoy, because she does an amazing job. So
she's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should have probably ended on that question, because I feel like you guys are all going to have something to say on that particular topic. But I want to get to Margot first, and then maybe we can open that one up. But Margot, you're also super prolific, super talented, but you've also published in other genres. So I'd love to hear from you, what draws you to crime fiction as well, but then also like how you approach writing thrillers differently than other genres that you do.
Well, thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. I actually, much like the other panelists here, I did not publish my first book. I published my 3rd or 4th book. I can't remember now. My first book I wrote to completion was a thriller. And I've always loved this genre. I also, I became a writer from a very unusual way, in that I went to law school and then didn't like practicing law. And my first job out of law school was I clerked for a judge on the Court of Criminal Appeals in Texas. And we did death penalty cases. My first job out of law school was I had a death penalty case handed to me. And I spent the next 2 years kind of reading about the worst of the worst people, doing the worst of the worst things. And I guess it sounds awful. There's all this heartache, but it grabbed me, and it interested me. So I started writing my first thriller then. Didn't sell it. At the point when I sold my first book, chick lit was kind of a huge thing. It was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so I tried writing one of those, sold it right away, and then wrote a series of those and some young adult books. But I kept wanting to go back to a thriller. And I eventually I had an idea that for Best Friends Forever that kept it grabbed me and it wouldn't let me go. And the second part of your question is, how is it different than writing women's fiction? The thing is, like, you can sort of know where the story's going to go, but you can meander into it. And you don't have to hit your prompts in quite the same way. With a thriller, I think everyone will agree, you've got to be plotted out before you even start. You need to know everything that's going to happen in every plot point, because if you miss something, the whole story could fall apart towards the end, or, in the middle of it. I mean, I've had that happen where I've thought, I remember there was a book I wrote and I hadn't researched the law enough. And I realized that there was a reporting law where the setting was that changed the entire trajectory of the story. So you've got to have all of your ducks lined up when you're writing thrillers. And I think that's probably the biggest difference between that and other genres.
Good to know. Good to know. Yeah, and it's definitely a very smart audience who will poke holes at it if you don't get it right. So, not that in other genres they aren't, but that for sure with thrillers. And it sounds like, kind of like Rachel, you were drawn to kind of processing these dark things that you'd learned about, and it was like a way for you to kind of dig into that. So I'm sure that's a common thread. Before I get into my next questions, I'm curious about, because I really loved what Brian said about hearing his work in audio. I'm curious for the other ones, like, are you able to listen to your work in audio? Is that a tough experience, or does the narration help that along?
I can. It's weird because a lot of the narration I've heard, the women are from the East Coast. And so hearing an East Coast accent for a very LA story, it's kind of weird, but then I forget. And then I forget that I wrote this thing that I'm listening to, and I'm like, what's next? Oh my God. So yeah, it's trippy. I just recently came into my very first book is not even digital. That was published back in 2002. And I probably still haven't earned out from it. So I will probably never see it digital, unless to audio. And so the first of my series was published in audio maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So this whole thing is new for me. And hearing my story read by someone else, yeah, initially, like Brian, it was like, let's not do that. But then it's like, this is interesting. And again, I forget that these words came out of this head, and someone else interpreting them it's quite trippy, and it's lovely. I love it.
That's great. Yeah, well, we're all suffering from brain fog, so
Yeah, I'll say quickly that I definitely listen to all the audiobooks. And I think it actually helps me. Like, it's interesting to me what is accentuated or what seems of note by the narrator. And so sometimes I'll listen to something and I'll be kind of surprised that they seem to like accentuate something which to me didn't seem that big of a deal, but it kind of shows you that, readers all read the books their own way as well. And you can try and plot this course through your story that you want these emotional peaks and valleys to hit, but ultimately the reader has their own thing when they go through it. So I actually do like listening to the audiobook. Sometimes I get nervous about it because just like Brian said, every now and then you'll be like, oh, that's not how I meant for that to go down. But it's a fun experience. I never read the books just because that takes too long, but I'll have the audiobooks on when I'm out walking the dogs or something.
Right. Well, that's a perfect segue, because the Gray Man series is a perfect example of like perfect marriage of content and voice. And I love that Jay Snyder, his performance is amazing. He's narrated the entire series. Can you tell us a little about that relationship? Like how did you land on Jay? And then how has his performance affected kind of the arc of the series, or anything in the series, if it has at all for you?
Yeah, it most definitely has. I was, as I said, I've got my audiobook offer wasn't like, blowing the doors out, or there was not necessarily a lot of hope to it, but things grew after a while. But I remember I was given 2 narrators to choose from, and one was Jay Snyder and the other one was another guy. And I actually liked them both. I remember being very sort of torn over it, but then I just kind of landed on Jay, and I couldn't be more happy. I mean, he's done so much. I'm very dialogue heavy in my writing, and my character, my hero, is smart alecky, always a little bit annoyed. He's a little bit like John McClane from Die Hard, like maybe less like Jason Bourne and more like John McClane in some ways. And Jay, the narrator, just really gets the character, and you can tell in the way that they do the dialogue that he's just world weary and all that sort of stuff. So I hate to say that I write for audio, but because then you're like, well, what about readers? But I mean, there is this feeling that I know it's going to be, said aloud, the dialogue, and I kind of enjoy thinking about that and putting that together in a way that I'd want to hear.
Yeah, that's a great call out about dialogue, because I think sometimes, like, when I first started working at Audible, getting really into audiobooks, I was like, it was like a mystery to me. Why are some books better in print, or why are some books even better in audio? And I think one of those elements for sure is dialogue. And so if you're a great dialogue writer in the beginning, then that's a big help. But I think that'll be like one of the tips that we dive into a little bit more. Rachel, your novella, How It Ends, was your first Audible original story. So those are audio first. They're written specifically for audio. I'd love to know what you learned about writing for audio in that experience. How was that for you?
It was incredible. I really love it, but it wasn't all that much different for me because I love dialogue, and I read aloud my stories when I'm writing them, and I listen for the musicality of it. And I try and do what Elmore Leonard says, cut out the boring stuff in all my writing. So it was kind of a natural fit for me. And there are a few times, maybe 2 or 3 times, when my Audible editor said, we can't do that because you can't really read that part. And it's like, oh, that's right. Okay, let me take that out. So there were like little things like that where I'd have an emoji or something that comes across, of course, on the page, but you can't really do fire emoji in onomatopoeia or whatever. So yeah, it just confirmed to me that I was doing something right with my written on the page stuff, and that the process is the same. You should read if there's young writers out there, read your stuff aloud and see how it sounds. Are you bored? Are you rushing through a part because you think it's boring, or you want to get to the good stuff? It should all be good stuff. It should all be music in your ears. And, again, it just confirmed that I'm on the right track when it comes to writing all of it.
Yeah, that's one thing we hear a lot from authors writing for audio, is like reading it aloud is really helpful. And do the rest of you guys find, like, with writing dialogue, is that how you write great dialogue? Do you say it aloud? Are you eavesdropping on conversations?
Yes.
I miss it, like during the pandemic.
Yes.
I just want to eavesdrop on people again.
You get the greatest conversations when they're like stupid, and someone asks, if you only had 3 minutes of Wi-Fi, who would you call? And it's like, really, this is a conversation? Let me write this down, because I will somehow put it in the book.
I love it. Brian, you've got an incredible output in audio. I believe that like every single book you've written is available in audio, and they're all super popular. So I really appreciate that. You've also worked with some of my favorite narrators, Joe Barrett and Scott Brick. We talked about January Lavoie. I think The Deep, Deep Snow was the first thing you've written like specifically for audio.
Right.
Can you tell us a little about that experience, what that was like?
Yeah, the Deep, Deep Snow, knowing that one was going to be done as an Audible original, I don't think it necessarily changed my approach, because like Rachel, I've always focused on kind of the musicality of both the prose and the dialogue, and so I'm used to the idea of writing out loud and reading it back and editing out loud. So that kind of has always been my process, and that worked very smoothly for The Deep, Deep Snow as well. What was different for me was sort of how to approach the storytelling in that book. And so I decided that because I knew right from the get-go this was going to be the narrator connecting with the listener. I decided to write the book in first person, and this was the first time that I'd written one of my mysteries and thrillers in first person. And then I decided to use a woman's voice as well, the young sheriff's deputy named Shelby Lake. And so that was a real interesting creative experience for me, because I wanted, I didn't want there to be any sort of gap between the narrator and the listener. So in this case, it really is sort of Shelby telling her story to the listener, and January as the narrator is really able to inhabit Shelby's personality. So that was the biggest change for me, was sort of capturing Shelby's voice in my head, and sort of giving them a platform for January to take over. And when you're writing in first person, I mean, so much weighs on the strength of that character, because I mean, it literally is her story. And I think there's almost like a trust level that sort of needs to build between the character and the writer, as if she's kind of got to open up and give you permission to tell her stories. So Shelby and I went back and forth a lot in those early chapters of the book, and I kind of felt like she was holding out on me in passages. And then we got to a chapter where she sort of revealed a secret about her background that I actually hadn't been aware of when I was plotting out the story. And it was as if she was kind of opening up and letting me inside her thoughts. And from that point forward, then the rest of the manuscript sort of flowed more smoothly. But that was kind of the big change to me, was to really do this in first person and give January the opportunity to really become that heroine.
That's really cool. The issue of perspective is so interesting too. Like, I think first person often works really well. Mark, I think you've switched perspectives sometimes, right, in the course of the Gray Man novels. And
yeah,
I've even
I did one book. I did one book in first person. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And I find too, like the second person perspective, which a lot of people find really gimmicky sometimes in print, in audio is like delicious. I don't know why. So it's really interesting. Margot, you have written 2 best-selling thrillers specifically for audio, Buried Deep, which was narrated by Therese Plummer, and The House on the Water, which I think I'm going to listen to again this summer. It's so good. And I could drink Taylor Schilling's voice. It's so good. But I'm curious, since you did 2, were there things that you learned in the first experience writing for audio that you were able to apply to the second one?
Well, I think the first thing is that both of my Audible originals, I'm not sure if everyone's done the same thing, but they're both novellas. They're not full-length novels. So every good thriller's got to lead up to the twist at the end. And I'm used to having 320 pages to sort of unspool that. Well, with my Audible originals, I had 100 to 110 pages. And so I had to get from point A to point B much faster than I was used to. So it was actually a really fun and challenging process, because I had to tell a story and use a lot fewer words to do it. But so I had to jump in with fully realized characters. I couldn't get to backstory very much. They had to just sort of, I had to wind them up and throw them out on the page, and they had to start going right away. So it was a really fun process in that way. And I agree with everyone else, dialogue heavy makes for a better audiobook. You can't have 2 pages of description. The listener gets bored, right? So you have to break up, but you still need to get across certain pieces of information. So I found that I was using just shorter sentence structures in my Audible books, my audiobooks, than I would if I was doing a book that was first coming out in text, or text and audio at the same time. I'm more conscious of that when I'm writing. Just keeping everything, you don't want the listener to wonder when they get to the end of the paragraph what happened at the beginning. You kind of want them to be able to follow it along very, very easily. I think if someone's driving and they have to sort of pay attention to the road all of a sudden and go back, you want them to be able to shift back into the story easily too.
Right. I've even heard super tactical advice, instead of saying something she said, writers will do she said something, because that's a little bit more how you would tell a story naturally, right, if you're talking. So
you think more about that as you're writing it too, because if you're having a conversation on a written page, you don't have to say he said, she said every single time. You can put it in sometimes, or leave it out. I mean, and leave it up to the reader. But in an audiobook, you also have to cue your narrator for what they're changing voices, and the reader is hearing, like in some audiobooks do multiple voices for multiple characters, and my audiobooks, they have not. So my narrators had to, change inflections of tone, or a male voice, a female voice. So, you want to have to cue that too.
Yeah, you even need to be conscious of things like section breaks. I mean, when somebody is actually reading a print book, they can see when there's a shift in the narration. But when the narrator's doing it, I mean, all you've got is a pause, and so you have to be conscious of, knowing that the beginning of a new section break will make it clear to the listener that you've moved on to a different part of the story.
Yeah, and this is also where you have to pay attention to your character, and not necessarily the way they talk, but how they talk. I mean, if there's no delineation on the page to say she said that and he said that, every character's philosophy has to come through in that dialogue so that the reader and the narrator can make that distinction between this one voice saying all these words.
Right.
So again, just because it's shorter and it's verbal doesn't mean that you can skimp on the characterization. If anything, it has to come through even stronger, just so that you can understand what's happening and who's saying what.
That's a great point. Right. I'm curious, for you guys, having all now worked with narrators, do you have any tips for anybody who might be writing their first audiobook? Any selection tips or tips for working with narrators?
Well, I'll say that, I see the narrator as a creative person and an artist just like I am. And so I don't like weigh them down with telling them what to do. I want their interpretation of the story. That said, there's, acronyms and military and espionage stuff that I write that, I do want to convey beforehand how this is said or that is said. But as far as, my advice to people would be to let the narrators, that be their wheelhouse, to control, and let them use their creativity. And they're doing that for a reason. That's what they do. And like, I wouldn't overly direct someone who narrated one of my books. What I think about the book is the 500 pages that gets handed to them, and then there, as I said, there's little things you want to point out here and there to make sure that they get it. But I've been pretty laissez-faire about it and very happy with the results.
Me too. The only thing I've done, I've brought my family in to listen to the voices. They know my story because before, I send it off to my agent or my editor, I read it to them. So my husband and my 7-year-old, they know the story. So when listening for the two actresses who, are up for the part, I get their opinions because, again, they see the story different than I do. I've lived with this voice in my head for however long, and they're coming with fresh ears and a fresh perspective. So outside help sometimes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times the narrators will get in touch with me before they begin the recording, just to ask, little things, pronunciations and things like that, which is, it's really helpful because it's those stupid little things that will tend to drive listeners crazy, particularly like geographic place names. I think in one of my early books, there's a reference to a town in northern Minnesota called Ely, which is spelled E-L-Y, and poor Joe ended up pronouncing it Eli, Minnesota. And I don't think listeners, particularly in Minnesota, have ever let him forget that. So
that happened for me. Los Angeles, we have all kind of Spanish names, and we have a suburb called Los Feliz, but it looks like Feliz because that's how. And it's like, no, it's Los Feliz. And I think that was the only mispronunciation in the book. And for me, like, Angelinos, we're very proud. We say the highway, the 110. There's a, weird way of how we speak out here. And Los Feliz became Los Feliz. But, it's like 1 out of, 20,000 words, she did incredible.
Right. But it stops you. I recently listened to a book. I'm not going to say what it was. It was incredible. But there was one section where they called Dos Equis beer Dos Equis. And I was like,
oh no.
Where did that come from? Great book though.
That's awesome.
I'm curious if you guys are, big audio listeners or not. Are there any audiobooks that you absolutely love that have inspired you at all, or that you were like, especially as you were writing for audio yourself, that you were like, oh, that's a good example to follow?
I'm a huge, I listen to audiobooks nonstop. I always have about 3 queued up at any given time. I feel like I'm always reading 2 or 3 books at the same time, and I'm listening to the books at the same time. So I'm a huge fan. I actually listen to a lot outside my genre. I do listen to a lot of thrillers as audiobooks, and I enjoy them. But my favorite is, it's an old book, well, not old, but it's Snobs by Gillian Fellows, who went on to do the Downton Abbey series. And for some reason, I listened to that audiobook probably 7 or 8 times. I just find it soothing. I don't know, maybe it's repetition, I don't know. But
Yeah.
but I'm the one person on this panel, I cannot listen to my own audiobooks at all.
You
Like
can't.
I've started every single one of them, and I almost immediately have to say, all right, I can't, because I don't know.
Is it just like a cringe thing? You're like, I wrote it, I can't do it.
It's not cringe. It's sort of like Mark said, I would never sit down and read the book once I get it in its hardcover form, it's sitting in front of me. I've never once cracked that open and started reading. I think part of that is that by the time the book is out in the world, I have already read that book, so many times. I have no interest in reading it again.
Yeah.
Plus, you'd start editing again, So.
Exactly. I'll get an email like that from like a reader who will say, I saw something on page 25 and I just want to let you know. And I'm like, what do you see happening here? She's going to be able to like magically go through and change all the errors in the book. Sorry about that, but.
That's such a good point, actually. Yeah, I can, that's relatable. Anybody else, any favorite audiobooks? Because now I'm like Snobs by Julian Fellows going right on my
I find
list.
it soothing. I mean, it's not a thriller. It's like a soothing story.
Yeah, I listen to audiobooks now whenever I'm exercising, and I typically don't listen in my genre, but I just love sampling different books and different narrators to kind of get a flavor of them. I recently did the Audible multi-voice narration of Dracula, which I thought was absolutely magnificent. I mean, just so brilliantly done. And a couple of months ago, I did Julia Whalen's version of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I don't think I'll ever read a book that mentions the devil without hearing Julia Whalen as the devil. She just does such an extraordinary job with that book.
She's incredible. She's incredible.
I'll have to check out Dracula.
It's outstanding. It's really good.
Yeah, that's a good one. And speaking of, that's an audio drama where it's, we've talked a lot about kind of traditional single narrator audiobooks, but audio dramas tend to have, multicast, and then there'll be sound effects. And there's a lot going on in that arena. And I know, Mark, you specifically worked on an Audible original, Armored, that's going to be an audio drama. Do you have anything to say about that experience? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it was Audible came to me several years ago, and they said, we're doing these scripted stories with sound effects and music and everything like that. And they asked if I'd be interested in doing it. And I was like, well, first, what are we talking about here? So they gave me some examples to go listen to. And I got real excited by it. And I remember coming back to them and I'm like, so I've had this idea for a screenplay that I've been working on for like 6 years, and I'm already on like page 250 and it's not even halfway through, which is not how you write a screenplay. If you're a guy that writes 160,000 word books, it's really tough to write a 120 page screenplay. So, but I really liked the story, and I said, I would. The other thing was there was no deadline for it. It was just a total spec idea that I had, and I do better with deadlines. I write 2 books a year, so if somebody's not making me write, I'm not going to do it. So I said, okay, I'll do the, if you like the story, what I have so far, I will do this for audio. And they liked it. So I went to do it, and I ended up punting a couple of times because I'd have to go work on another book and come back. And fortunately the people at Audible were very patient with me, and I turned it in, and it was really tough to do it because tooling it for audio, I mean, putting in sound cues and stuff like that was, it was like a screenplay, but you had to be very, very precise with, what was communicated. And I turned it in and they liked it. And then I went up to Audible last year, right before coronavirus for a meeting. And I just remember it was like a pre-production meeting and they're like, well, you did leave us with a lot of production challenges here. We're going to need 13 Mexican actors in the New York area. It's going to be a little tough. And so there were 30 something characters and then a lot of this and that. And I was like, yeah, but you guys never told me, no one ever put any reins on me. They just said do it. And to their credit, they've recorded it and they managed to do it. So I think I gave a lot of headaches to people up there, but I think the end result is going to be a pretty exciting story.
It seems like a return
a lot of jobs.
It seems like it's a return to the old time radio programs that, I mean.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's
in fact, I'd actually love to see, Audible and the other publishers doing more of exactly that, even with adapting existing works. A few years ago, I took one of my Jonathan Stride short stories, Spitting Devil, and I adapted it into sort of a radio play format. And we did a couple of live performances of that, which was just a real fun way of reinventing the material. And it made me think, gosh, I'd love to see us taking, some of our longer novels and, reimagining them as, shorter radio plays. I certainly know that when, I'm looking at what am I going to listen to next, I do sort of find myself looking at the length of the project and thinking, oh boy, 20, 30 hours, that's a lot of commitment there. But, if we take, a longer novel and condense it down to a radio play format that's 3, 4, 5 hours, that's something that I think a lot of listeners would get behind.
That's a question that I actually have for you, Kat. I mean, is that like the future of Audible? Are we going to be going toward more of those type of audio
That's
plays?
a great question. I'm not going to speak for Audible as a whole, but there's a lot of different directions. There are multiple types of projects happening, but I think the audio drama is so exciting, and it comparing it to a radio play is totally accurate, but then it's also a little squicky because it's like, that's so old fashioned. But it really is like if you want some great examples, like Brian's example of Dracula is spot on. That's like one of the best casting coups ever. It's like got Tim Curry and Alan Cumming. It's fantastic. It's so good. Another one I would highly recommend is called Evil Eye by Madhuri Shaker. If anyone has not listened
that was great.
Fabulous. It was commissioned as an audio play, but it's a multicast recording. It's got sound effects, but it's not, like too in your face. I mean, the story is written
super creepy
for audio. Yes. And it's written, the author wrote it as a series of phone calls. So she really developed it like in mind that it would be easy to listen to in that way. And it's scary, it's creepy, it's funny, it's so good. It also became a movie, but I think the audiobook is still better. And the last thing I'll say on that topic is I think there's still a ton of room for like graphic novels to be developed in audio. And where I feel like I'm seeing that going is more with these audio dramas that we're talking about, because it is just a better way to translate that medium, because there's not like all the little descriptors and passages and all that stuff. I think there's still so many great graphic novels that aren't in audio, but one that I recently listened to that I absolutely loved is called Good Talk by Mira Jacob. It's not a thriller. It's a memoir actually, and it's about an Indian American mother, and she's got a Jewish husband, and they're raising this incredible 6-year-old biracial son, and he has so many questions about his race. He's obsessed with Michael Jackson, so he's constantly asking questions about his skin color and then his own race, and she's like trying to answer him, and it's all done through just like casting, like multiple actors, and it's just really like natural and easy to listen to. So I do think for certain projects that is like a really cool way forward, and we're definitely doing a lot more of those. So if you guys have interest in playing in that area, I think it's a really cool place to explore. Yeah, really good question. What else was I going to ask you guys? I'd love to know, I guess, if you feel like the experience of writing for audio or, listening to your audiobooks, has that made you a better writer overall?
For me, I would say yes, because again, it's brevity. We're used to the sprawl of a novel and taking your time. And, I still do that with novels, but again, I'm editing with an eye toward hearing this. And by actually hearing my work audio wise, it makes me a better editor because, I want to get in and out of a scene quicker than what I would have had I've never heard this being spoken by anyone other than me. So yes, my editing has sharpened.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, when you're reading your work out loud, boy, you can tell immediately when the pace slows down.
Yeah.
So you can, you get tired reading it out loud yourself. Like, okay, yep, need to make some cuts here.
So many words, so many words.
You had to be ruthless. But my son had a final project for his English class, and I edited it for him, and the page was just bleeding. And he's looking, and I said, "This is when I edit my stuff." And I showed him one of my pages, and he was like, "You're taking out full paragraphs." I went, "Oh yes,
Oh yeah,
just slash slash slash."
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And are there any common rookie mistakes you think that people could avoid? Does anyone have any of those?
I do.
Yes.
What absolutely drives me crazy if I read it, but especially in an audiobook form, is if two characters are having a conversation and they continue to refer to one another by their first name.
oh, that drives me crazy.
Drives me. It's like fingers
That
on the
happened in
chalkboard.
Titanic, and it was driving me crazy.
Yes.
Rose, Jack. I know you.
Jack Rose. Yes. No. It's
Yeah.
You've got two characters. If you're sitting in a room with someone, you might say their name if they're not paying attention to you at that point and angrily at that point. But two people do not sit there and go back and forth. It's weird. So
Yeah.
I guess just sort of in general, if you're having dialogue, it should flow like a normal conversation would flow. Maybe tighter and snappier, but it should feel what's the word I'm looking for? Natural, genuine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's another thing, just reading your work out loud. And that's not just for audio, that's just for writing in general, because you find so many issues that you have when you actually enunciate it. And I think, like calling people by their name to identify them in a story, it's taking the easy way out. And I think if as a writer you find yourself taking the easy way out, you should probably second guess that a little bit and be like, okay, am I just putting this person's name here because I don't want to say he said, she said, or is there something I can do to the dialogue to sort of make it obvious who's speaking here? And that might be a little bit more work, a little bit harder, but it's a heck of a lot more natural.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and we don't have to know all the things. I mean, in our genre, there's so much stuff, and it's good stuff, and we find it all fascinating because we're those people. We find things fascinating, but we don't have to put every fascinating thing in there because it's not. So if you find yourself explaining a lot of things, what is the core message you're trying to say? In my I have a day job and I write for my day job. And my boss always told me, write to a third grader, always write to your daughter. And I do that. And that means cutting out all that stuff that I find fascinating to get down to exactly what I need to say and then move on. Because, just because you find it interesting, who wants to read page and paragraph, especially now when there's so many other things to do besides reading and listening. Just get it, just say it and move on. Just stop.
Yes.
Kill your darling.
Editing.
Yes.
That's really good advice. Anybody else some great writing advice before we start to wrap up?
Last thing, one more thing is just a rookie mistake that I made was I do a lot of research for my books, and I would catch myself in the early years, probably still to this day, trying to work things into the story, just like what Rachel just said. I mean, it was just basically like, I went to the trouble to do the research. I read that really dry 600-page manual. So I'm going to learn about it. Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm impressed with myself for learning this. So, but yeah, if it doesn't propel the story, it doesn't belong in there. And you know, I wrote in the Tom Clancy world, and it is, you know, in the olden style, it was pretty much a techno thriller where you saw a lot of, you know, every detail. And I think one of his books, Sum of All Fears, there's a nuclear detonation, and it's 6 pages to
Yeah.
explain the detonation. Well, at
Yep.
the time, that was
It
blew
blew
people
up.
away.
Tom,
and
that's
people
all you need to say.
yeah, I mean, I was like, I remember I was like, I would just write boom, you know, and save like 5. And that's not a criticism of Clancy, because that was exactly what people wanted in those techno thrillers. And I was one of the biggest readers of them back then. I have the first edition of that because I bought it the day it came out. And that worked then, but times are different. And I really think that, you know, if you're putting stuff in there now that is research for the sake of research, then you probably want to try and edit that out.
Great point. And I loved like what Margot said earlier about how hard it was to pack stuff into that smaller novella format. I mean, it's like that. If I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. Like that's actually harder sometimes, right? Like,
that's why poetry is, that's something else I would say. Read some poetry, because poetry packs so much and so many ideas into, you know, a page length of words, and you hear the musicality, you get the plot. There's so much in a poem that teaches you. And I'd say to young writers, read a poem a month at least. Get something, or even musical lyrics, anything that's away from our genre. Yeah, pay attention to the lyrics of songs. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
great advice. My writing teacher used to tell us, like, just read T.S. Eliot before you start writing, and then just go from there. Yeah. Great. Before we start to wrap, I'd love to just know if you guys have any exciting future projects you can share with us before we go. Maybe I'm just going to go down how I'm looking in the Zoom call. Brian, what are you excited about that you're working on next?
Yeah, in fact, next month, late June, I think it's June 25th, the follow-up Audible original to The Deep, Deep Snow will be coming out. So the Ursulina will be available from Audible. And once again, January Lavoie is back to do the narration. So I'm incredibly excited about that.
Can't wait. I love it. Mark, how about you?
Yeah, so Armored, which is the big scripted audio drama that I wrote for Audible, will be out, I think, in the fall sometime. And then my 11th book in the Gray Man series is called Sierra 6, and it will be out next February, hopefully right around the time the film version of the first book comes out. But I'm probably not going to get that lucky, but hopefully roughly around the same time.
Amazing. Rachel, what about you?
My first novel with Thomas and Mercer comes out in September, These Toxic Things. I'm extremely excited about that because it plays with form. And my next Audible original comes out, I think maybe in the fall or winter, something like that. And it's a weird one for me because it's not an LA story. It takes place in Zion National Park. And it's visits the world of glamping, which is glamorous camping, and how things can get horribly wrong for city girls like me.
That's well timed. I feel like that's, you know, with this pandemic kind of, you know, starting to slow down, like we can travel and do more things, but not a ton more. So glamping. Yeah. Margot, what about you?
I am just now finishing up my 3rd Audible original, which I have to get on my editor's desk very, very, very soon. And it's a little bit more of a meta project. It's about, I was inspired by listening to crime podcasts, of which I listen to many. I actually listen to them for, I call it research. So it's my excuse for sitting around listening to podcasts all day. And it's another novella about a woman who has a crime podcast and is solving the crime that she's featuring in her crime podcast. Ooh. So it goes back and forth between the text to the podcast form.
Wow.
You guys are all like thank you so much for giving us such amazing things to listen to and such great writing advice today. I know you're all incredibly busy, and just I thank you so much for today. This has really been such a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.